On the night of March 8, 2019, a lighthouse on the coast of Maine went dark for the first time in 114 years. No storm, no power failure, no mechanical fault. The lighthouse simply stopped. The Coast Guard received the alert at 2:17 a.m. A patrol boat reached the lighthouse at 3:44 a.m. They found the light off, the door locked from the inside, every window intact, and the keeper, a man named Thomas Aldridge, who had tended that lighthouse alone for 11 years, was gone. Not gone the way people go when they leave. Gone the way people go when they don't choose to. His coat was on the hook by the door. His boots were on the mat. His dinner was on the table, half-eaten, fork resting on the edge of the plate as if he had set it down for a moment and intended to come back. His logbook was open on the desk. The last entry read, "Something is wrong with the light. Going to check." The entry was timed at 1:58 a.m. He was never seen again. Thomas Aldridge was 61 years old. He had lived and worked on Pell Island Lighthouse since 2008, when he had applied for the position after 30 years working as a marine engineer. He was, by the accounts of everyone who knew him, a man who had chosen solitude deliberately and wore it comfortably. He took the supply boat to the mainland once a month. He had a daughter named Ruth, who lived in Portland and called him every Sunday evening. He had no social media presence, no close friends on the mainland, no habits or routines that extended beyond the island. He read a great deal. He maintained the lighthouse with an exactness that the Coast Guard inspectors noted in their annual reports with something approaching admiration. He kept a logbook that went back 11 years and documented every weather event, every ship passage, every mechanical irregularity with the same careful precision. He was, Ruth would later say, the most methodical person she had ever known, which was why the half-eaten dinner bothered her more than anything else. Her father did not leave things half-finished. The investigation was conducted jointly by the Coast Guard and the Maine State Police. It lasted 6 weeks officially. It is never formally closed. What investigators found on Pell Island in the days following Thomas Aldridge's disappearance raised questions that none of them were able to answer. The first question was about the light itself. The lighthouse lamp was not broken. It was not malfunctioning. When the Coast Guard technician examined it on the morning after Thomas's disappearance, it worked perfectly. He turned it on and off twice to confirm. It performed exactly as it should. But between 1:58 a.m., when Thomas wrote his last log entry, and 2:17 a.m., when the Coast Guard received the darkness alert, the light had been switched off, deliberately, from the inside. Someone had turned it off, and then that same person, or someone else, had vanished from a locked island with no boat and no bridge and no means of departure that investigators could identify. The supply boat was still moored at the island's small dock, intact, undisturbed. The second question was about the logbook. Thomas had been meticulous. 11 years of entries, never a day missed, written in the same careful hand, documenting everything that happened on that island with the thoroughness of a man who understood That precision was the difference between safety and catastrophe at sea. But in the 6 weeks before his disappearance, investigators noticed something. The entries had changed, not dramatically. Not in a way that would be obvious to anyone who hadn't read all 11 years carefully. But Detective Anna Kerrigan, a 15-year veteran of the Maine State Police who had been assigned to the case and who had, over 3 days, read every single entry in that logbook, noticed it. The entries from the final 6 weeks were shorter, less detailed, and scattered throughout them, in a way that seemed almost accidental, were references to something Thomas called the signal. January 14th. Light running well, wind from the northeast. Heard the signal again tonight. 3 times, same interval. January 29th. Supply boat delayed. Called Ruth. She sounds well. The signal was closer last night. I have been trying to understand its pattern. February 11th. Clear night. 3 ships passed. I have begun to think the signal is not natural. I have begun to think it is directed. February 28th. I have responded. I do not know if this was wise. March 4th. 4 days since I responded. Nothing since. Perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps it was nothing. March 7th. The night before he disappeared, it answered. Detective Kerrigan spent considerable time trying to determine what the signal was. Thomas's logbook gave her the times and intervals of what he had described hearing, but no description of its nature. Was it a sound, a light, a radio transmission? He had written about it as if its nature was self-evident, as if he was documenting something he had already described in detail. But no such description existed anywhere in the logbook. She interviewed the crew of the supply boat. None of them had noticed anything unusual on their monthly visits to the island. She contacted marine biologists and acoustic specialists, who offered various explanations for unusual sounds in coastal environments: whale communication, underwater geological activity, man-made sonar interference. None of these explanations satisfied her, because of one detail. On February 28th, Thomas had written, "I have responded." Whatever the signal was, Thomas Aldridge had sent something back, and 6 days later, on March 7th, it answered, and the following night, he was gone. Ruth Aldridge flew to Maine from Portland 3 days after her father's disappearance. She was 34 years old. She worked as a civil engineer. She had her father's methodical quality, the same attention to detail, the same discomfort with loose ends. And she applied it to the investigation of his disappearance with a focus that the police found at various points both helpful and difficult to manage. She went through everything on the island, every drawer, every cabinet, every shelf. She read the logbook. She read his personal journals, which the police had examined but not removed. She found 2 things that had not been in the police reports. The first was a notebook, separate from the official logbook, smaller, with a red cover, tucked behind a false panel at the back of a drawer in the desk. The red notebook contained Thomas's personal observations about the signal, written in a smaller, more urgent hand than the logbook entries. Beginning in early January, he had been hearing it since December. He described it as a pattern of low-frequency pulses, audible only in the watchroom at the top of the lighthouse, only between the hours of 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., and only when the weather was clear. He had recorded the intervals, he had graphed them. He had spent weeks trying to determine if they were random. They were not random. The intervals followed a pattern that Thomas, with his background in marine engineering, recognized as a modified version of a signaling protocol used by the military in the 1960s, a protocol that had been officially discontinued in 1978. Someone was using a decommissioned military signaling frequency, and they were transmitting from somewhere in the water, off Pell Island. The second thing Ruth found was a map, hand-drawn, on the back of a supply requisition form, showing the waters around Pell Island with a series of coordinates marked in red ink. The coordinates formed a shape, a rough circle, approximately 2 miles in diameter, centered on a point in the water about a mile northeast of the island. At the center of the circle, Thomas had written on one word: below. Ruth gave both items to Detective Kerrigan. Detective Kerrigan submitted a request for a marine survey of the coordinates. The request was processed through standard channels and assigned to a contractor who conducted an underwater survey using sonar equipment. The survey found nothing. Detective Kerrigan submitted a second request, asking for a more detailed examination of the sea floor at the specific central coordinates. The second request was denied. She was informed that the area fell within a designated maritime exclusion zone, and that further survey work would require federal clearance. Detective Kerrigan had worked in Maine for 15 years. She had never heard of a maritime exclusion zone in those waters. She submitted a request for information about the exclusion zone. The response she received stated that the exclusion zone had been in place since 1971 and was related to legacy Cold War infrastructure. She asked what infrastructure. She was told the information was classified. Thomas Aldridge has been missing for 5 years. He has not been found. His case has not been closed. His daughter Ruth visits the island twice a year. She stands in the watchroom and looks out at the water and thinks about the coordinates on the map and the word her father wrote at the center of the circle. Below. The lighthouse has a new keeper now. A younger man recently posted. He has been told about Thomas Aldridge the way you tell people about things that happened before they arrived. Briefly, without dwelling on the details. He was not told about the signal. On his 3rd week on the island, he was in the watchroom at 2 a.m. when he heard something. Low, regular, coming from somewhere in the water to the northeast. He stood at the window for a long time. Then he went downstairs. He made coffee. He told himself it was nothing. The ocean makes sounds. Currents move in strange ways at night. There are explanations for everything if you look hard enough. He has not mentioned it in his logbook. He has not told anyone. But some nights when the weather is clear and the water is still and the light turns above him in its ancient rhythm, he stands at the window. And he listens, and he wonders if Thomas Aldridge stood in this exact spot, in this exact silence, looking at this exact stretch of water. And he wonders what Thomas heard, and whether Thomas in the end found out what was below, and whether finding out was worth the cost. This story is fictional and created for entertainment purposes only.